the Russian economy and Russians, from billionaires to professors like me, has been extraordinary. And I would add to that the number of NATO forces that have been moved to the frontline states, which I think is prudent. And by the way, I think we should talk about this a little bit more. The notion that Putin, after going in and fighting the Ukrainian forces and having such trouble there right now, that he would go on a suicide mission and attack a NATO country in addition to that, when we have orders of magnitude more firepower and manpower and the sophisticated weapons compared to the Ukrainians, seems to me to be utterly absurd. There's too much loose talk about first Ukraine and next Poland. I think it's the exact opposite. That is much more unlikely today than it was 3 weeks ago. But if you're Zelensky, and I heard in his voice, yeah, that's great, but we're still dying here. We're still losing this war. Our people are still dying. And therefore, I think in terms of, one of the mistakes, by the way, we made, Joe, and maybe I'm even at fault on this, I want to own this, is we spent a little too much time talking about the details of those MiG-29s, right? And I think in some ways that got us in trouble. Instead, we should just quietly send the weapons he needs to help defend the air and defend against artillery.
Exactly. I am so maddened by people who make public pronouncements, Richard Haass, of what we're going to be sending in. Keep your GD mouth shut. That's the last thing we need to do. We have senators running around Capitol Hill talking about regime change, where you're putting us into an all-or-nothing nuclear war or defeat situation. If that thought sinks in to Putin's mind, we have people running around saying, look at what we're going to ship into Ukraine. A lot more people need to keep their mouths shut. I do, though, Richard, I do understand. And it's something that I was warning about a week ago before we signed off last Friday. I said, I know you're going to see a lot of horrifying images on your air over the next week. We need to keep our heads about us and not trigger World War III. Peggy Noonan's writing about that in the Wall Street Journal this weekend. But let's step back for 1 second, Richard, and talk about the massive number of weapons that are going in there. The most impressive coalition that's been put together since Bush 41. And one final thing. As we bring up Bush 41 and what he did in the first Gulf War, remember that there were people screaming from the cheap seats then as well that George H.W. Bush should take the tanks all the way into Baghdad. He showed restraint. And he caught hell for it for a decade until his son tried to do the same thing. I know we've got Twitter. I know we've got 24/7 cable news. But talk about how sometimes restraint is the better part of valor.